Hi there. This is just a video about whether the Kirpan should be banned and how there are religious exemptions for every religion in the country except for Christians, despite the fact it's been a Christian country for 1500 plus years and that it's still constitutionally a Christian country. So it's made a few notes here that I'll look at now and then. So firstly, obviously, this is in reference to the sad death of Henry Nowak. Before addressing the issue of discriminations against Christians, I'd just really like to touch on something a lot of people have been talking about, which is discriminations or kind of anti-white discrimination. Now, is there anti-white discrimination in the country now? You would have to say yes, there is. And there are a number of kind of cases which prove this. Firstly, just anecdotally, as someone born and brought up in England in my early 40s, I've seen how things have changed over the years, and it is now acceptable to say things about white people that it wouldn't have been acceptable to say before. And almost the word white is now used as a swear word. This is also the case in other countries like America or Canada or wherever, but it is definitely prevalent here. Not only are kind of white people kind of lumped together, so someone of an Irish background whose family might have suffered from the potato famine or genocide, someone from Poland whose family would have suffered from Nazi and Russian occupation, or a working class family whose family had been in, or ancestors had been in the pits or shipbuilders or whatever, are all put together as just a white elite person like Jacob Rees-Mogg or David Cameron. And there's no nuance at all. Every white person is deemed to have privilege, and that's it. And almost like the Christian concept of original sin, there's nothing a white person can do about that. They're just people imbued with privilege, and for that reason, there's a kind of mark against them. So we've had that. There's also been the case where a lot of great culture that comes from maybe predominantly white countries or done by white people has been not. So in England, there's been a real kind of move to not great people like Sir Winston Churchill, great artists, great writers, great thinkers, great philosophy thinkers. A lot of universities have got rid of Enlightenment philosophers. I mean, these are some of the cleverest people of all time, but they don't want to teach people like Kant. So you can see an attack there, and even more brutal attacks. You saw after the George Floyd attack, death of George Floyd, and the BLM riots. You saw the cenotaph attacked, and things like the Union flag burned. So this is all a kind of attack on a kind of white culture or white people. Now, this has also manifested itself in really serious ways. So there's been a few cases, obviously the death of Henry Nowak, where the police just didn't believe it. They saw what they saw as a working class white guy. They thought he was drunk, even though he wasn't, and just assumed he was racist because someone told him he was. And even when he said he'd been stabbed repeatedly and said he couldn't breathe, they didn't look to help him. They actually didn't even check, and instead they handcuffed him and dragged him along the ground and sneered at him as well, saying things like, "I don't think so, mate." So we saw that there. We saw that with the grooming gang scandal, where a lot of white people, a lot of white girls, a large number of white working class girls from predominantly northern towns were gang raped and trafficked, and the police didn't do anything. In some cases, covered it up, and the government covered it up and had to be dragged kicking and screaming to hold an inquiry. And we had the case of the Southport murder, where the person who did it was flagged up previously, and someone said, the person who was flagged up to said, "Well, don't kind of stereotype this person. We can't. We shouldn't kind of incarcerated because you're kind of stereotyping a kind of young black man. Nottingham attack, 3 people killed, and again the person was flagged up, but they didn't want to incarcerate another black person because it would be disproportionate compared to the number of black people in the country. Now, in all these cases, a kind of political correctness was seen as more important than the lives of people and for the law to be applied properly. So that's just a little kind of background into a kind of anti-white prejudice. You also had the difference in where you see the riots and protests after George Floyd, where people were encouraged to be angry and encouraged and to protest, compared to the aftermath of the Henry Nowak scandal, where people were told not to, and that they shouldn't be angry and they should just kind of stay quiet, basically. And that's quite telling. Right, so now moving on to really what the video is about, which is the banning of the Kirpan and discrimination against Christians. Right, so in this country, there are religious exemptions for Sikhs, for Jews, for Muslims. Sikhs are allowed to carry a knife. The knife used to kill Henry Nowak was about 7-ish inches. Now, if someone who wasn't a Sikh was caught carrying a knife that big, even if they didn't use it, they'd be put in prison. So it's a bit strange that there's an exemption, especially when it can have such dangerous consequences. Now, Jews and Muslims have dietary exemptions. They're allowed to slit the throats of animals until they bleed to death. This is not allowed for non-Jews or Muslims, so that is a practice of halal and kosher meat. Now, these exemptions don't exist for anyone else. And if you look at, say, fox hunting, it was banned because of cruelty to animals. It's hard to say that halal or kosher aren't cruel to animals. So again, there's religious exemptions in this case, in the case of really effectively torturing a sentient being. Now, this is really interesting given the fact that despite Britain being a constitutionally Christian country, and traditionally a Christian country, been Christian for 1500 years, it is a country which is now anti-Christian. Now, there are rights that are denied Christians. So you have exemptions for non-Christians, but rights denied to Christians. So if you think back to a few years ago where the MP, Sir David Amess, was stabbed to death by an Islamist in his constituency, a priest tried to come in and give him last rites. The policeman stopped him and said it was a crime scene and he couldn't do that. So he denied a devout Catholic the last rites effectively on his deathbed. For the policeman, the law came before Sir David Amess's religion. This is not the case for any other religion in this country. If you look at poor Henry Nowak, if the police had actually paid attention to his injuries, and it was the case that there was nothing they could do, it would have been good to think that they at least thought about contacting a priest to enact the last rites. This thing just isn't thought about by the police. It's not even in their mindset. They're not interested in Christian rituals. It's only other religions, despite this being constitutionally a Christian country. And I think this kind of goes to the hub of the anti-Christian discrimination in the country. Now, I think it was the Bishop of Shrewsbury, I'll just check his name, is Mark Davis, said that the last rites should be seen as a kind of like emergency service, or treated more like an emergency service, where people who are dying, Christians or specifically Catholics, are able to request it more easily, or at least the police are more kind of in tune with that. Now, that seems like the least really the state or the police can do, given the fact there's exemptions for every other religion. So that would be something important. Now, even though there's a danger with carrying a knife of 7 or 8 inches, it's still allowed because it is a kind of religious exemption for Sikhs. Does a Sikh's right to carry a 7-inch or 8-inch knife trump the right of a non-Sikh to live? And I think that's the big question. Now, a lot of MPs, a lot of Sikh MPs have said, but look, Sikhs are disciplined, they'd never do that, or one has. And even if it's just one, that's one too many. And that's why there shouldn't be exemptions. So that does not, the Sikhs' religious rights do not trump a person's right to life. Now, what's interesting is there is a kind of reverence for Sikhism in Britain. I don't know if it's the same in a country like America, but probably in somewhere like Canada, New Zealand, Australia, kind of Anglosphere countries, where there's a real reverence for Sikhism. And a lot of it's to do with the Sikh regiments in the First and Second World War. But there's also another couple of reasons. One, it's the usual suspects who are kind of anti-Christian, like to elevate the other religions above Christianity to diminish Christianity. But in this case, it's something more interesting. The right wing, or the people who normally are quite patriotic or pro-Christian, have elevated the Sikhs to a high level. And I think in a lot of cases, it's people who are wanting to show that they're not racist. So in a sense, these are usually people who talk a lot about Islam and talk a lot about Islamic terrorism, deporting Islamic terrorists, people kind of talk about that all the time. And so they want to show that their issue isn't with someone's race, it's just purely with an ideology. In this case, their issue with Islamism. So they put up the Sikhs as like an example of how people have integrated, and how, despite having a different skin colour, you can still have the same British values as someone whose ancestors might have been here from, the 800s or whatever. And I think that's the reason. So for that reason, Sikhs have been elevated in a way that their religion probably doesn't really warrant. I mean, this is not a criticism, but it's a fairly new religion. It's only about 500 years old. You compare that to Christianity, which is over 2,000 years old, or Judaism, which is over 3,000 years old. It's also a religion that is really specific to a certain region. The Sikhs we get in Canada, New Zealand, England, Australia, all derive from that region. So it's not like, say, Islam or Christianity, where you can get a black Muslim, a white Muslim, a Chinese Christian, African Christian, white Christian. It's just specifically one kind of ethnic group, really, a specific from a specific region, and that's it. So, given that, it is a bit strange that it's kind of given this reverence and adoration that people don't give Christianity in Europe. So it's kind of peculiar in that way. It should really be put more on the level of Jehovah's Witnesses, Rastafarians, Mormons, Scientologists. It's a religion which probably has max 20 million. Now, if you look at Christianity, just one denomination of Christianity, Catholicism, has over 1 billion. And that's treated with nowhere near the same respect in this country as Sikhism. So there does need to be a kind of readdressing of that balance. Now, it's kind of clear that in this country, now I don't know if it's the same in other ones, I can only speak for England, the country I'm from, there seems to be an elite that looks to marshal both the kind of white working class and the ethnic minorities, in a sense where they have a kind of colonial approach to both, and they're happy to gaslight or use both in a way of governing them. um, rather than just having a law that applies to everyone equally. So it's almost like a divide and rule thing. Now, you you cannot have a situation, like I say, where there's one rule for one and not the other. And just to be clear, that the reason why the Kirpan must be banned is because no other person can carry a knife in this country without being arrested. And if you look at a black or white person walking down the street with a knife and they're apprehended by the police, they will be in prison, even if they don't use it. It is simply not good enough to say, "Oh, the Sikhs are more disciplined." It's anecdotal. It's not. It's not true. It's not. It's not. It's not scientific. And you saw in Parliament the other day a lot of Sikh MPs making this about themselves. It's kind of like they paid lip service to the sad death of Henry, but then made it, and then there was a lot of bots. Was obviously sad about this bot, and then made it about themselves. And th- this is just kind of unacceptable. And it really is a reminder that we just have to have a law that applies to everyone. This country has been Christian, like I say, for 1,500 plus years. It, its whole identity is linked to Christianity indelibly. Even some of the Protestant denominations in this country are older than Sikhism. Yet, Sikhism has kind of treated preferentially towards Christianity in this country, and there's just no good reason for it. Now, what I would say to everyone is, please write or email your MP and ask them to ban the Kirpan. Also, ask them if they're not going to ban it, if they could make the last rites an emergency service, so that there's police, rather than arresting dying Catholics, actually ask for them, ask them if they would like the last rites, and they're able to get a priest to administer them, so that they are actually given the final sacrament rather than being sneered at and pulled around and handcuffed. So do write to your MP or email them or tweet them and just ask them to ban this, and ask them to have a country where Christianity is no longer or Christians are no longer discriminated against.